Tim Cummiskey, how are you doing?
Hey, Sean. Good. Good to see you, man. Been
Good
too
to see
long.
you, Tim. Yeah, it's way too long. We've played a lot of gigs together over the years.
Yeah, I think the last time we played was back in January.
And of course, that seems like a lifetime ago, although that wasn't that long ago, actually. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. The last gig I did before the pandemic hit, let's see here. I think it was a gig in February. Yeah, it might have been this February 14th gig.
Wow.
I played with Tony DeSere. You know, I interviewed him, and it was with the Columbus Symphony Orchestra.
Cool.
And that seems like so long ago. It's just so long ago, and you know, then like you said, we played together in January. But okay, so how do we meet? Like you're gonna have to tell this story because I don't remember it exactly.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first off, yeah, the whole pandemic thing, it's really scrambles time. But that period since January, we haven't played since January. I was just thinking that's the longest time that we haven't played.
Oh yeah.
In like, you know, the 15 years we've been playing regularly together, or whatever it is. But
yeah.
So, but to your question, let's see. You remember the Bird of Paradise jam session up in Ann Arbor?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was the first time I met you, and that must have been in, 95 or 96. I can't remember. I think you were too young to go into the club because I think your dad came in with you. It doesn't matter, but I just remember that. I'm like, man, who is this guy? It was, I think, Sean Dobbins with Marty Finkbinder. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And so you came in and played My Funny Valentine and tore it up.
It's funny because so I interviewed Sean Lightning Dobbins, right? And we talked about that. We talked about that also because I think that might have been the first time that we played together. Sean and I played together too. And he was, you know, kind of recalling certain events and things. And of course, I you know, a lot of that I don't remember, but I do remember playing My Funny Valentine that night, and I felt pretty good. And it was a fun gig. Yeah. Yeah.
Time flies, and then I think the next time I saw you is when you were interviewing for the job at OSU, which was, I don't know,
2004.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And of course that seems like forever ago too, you know. But okay, so it seems like one of the first gigs I had, regular gigs in Columbus since moving back, was a gig that we had together down at this what was it, in Centerville? And
Stagecoach Barbecue.
Yeah, that's right. And just the barbecue was worth the gig. You know, playing that gig with you, and this is before I played, you know, I played bass, and, you know, this is before then, but it was kind of the beginning of me thinking maybe playing bass might be a good idea. Because we were doing all these duo things, and I was like walking the bass line on the horn while you were playing, you know, and it was a lot of interconnectivity and yeah. So And then
And we were like doing some of your tunes and you know, bebop and all the jazz literature. We weren't just, you know, playing blue bossa. So
right. He was playing some real tunes. That's always seems to be something that we've connected well on, is just challenging music, like stuff that kind of pushes the boundaries.
Yeah, man.
And I always feel like I'm getting a guitar lesson too when I'm playing with you, because I'm paying close attention to what you're doing. I mean, you have to be top 10 guitar player on earth.
Oh man, cut it out.
In that category. I mean, seriously, just the stuff that you're able to do with the instrument is, frankly, stuff that I've not really heard anyone else be able to do. Not at the proficiency level that you do it.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. It means a lot coming from you.
And when I did start playing guitar, which is, I don't know, what is that, 7 years ago or something? You very generous. You gave me a bunch of stuff to work on, and I think I owe my left hand technique completely to you. Getting my pinky on the fingerboard all the time. You know, you have the guitar players that play the kind of with the 3 fingers, and from me studying your left hand, also from studying Scott Gould's left hand.
Sure.
Just
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, well, you're a quick study, but I probably joked with you at the beginning. The 3 most important things are left hand technique, and left hand technique. So that's
definitely.
That's it.
Now, speaking of technique on the instrument, something that you have that I don't think I'll ever have, and it's just your right hand, your picking is your alternate picking is like totally ridiculous. You just have so much speed and clarity and string skipping and all of this crazy stuff, and something else that is unusual in your style is you have this ability to walk a bass line as you're playing the chords, but you don't do it the sort of cheapo way. The cheapo way is you're kind of playing the root a lot. Dun 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 dun.
Sure.
You're actually playing different inversions. The chords are inverting on top of whatever the root is, and we play tunes and we're playing fast tempos, and you're playing all of that stuff, and it's just it's pretty amazing. Where did you get your right hand from?
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of like my pilgrimage, because I really came up getting into guitar when I'd say the apex of a lot of great heavy metal and hard rock players were very prominent. Richie Blackmore, Eddie Van Halen, of course the guys that, historically preceded that, like, Jimmy Page, but especially that metal era, like Randy Rhoads. I thought Randy Rhoads would have been one of the greatest guitarists and rock guitarists, had he lived longer. Yngwie Malmsteen, I think, is a fine player. And that's kind of when I started transitioning into jazz via fusion. So the guys like Steve Morse and Sean Lane, I can't forget Al Di Meola. And John.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
Going, but you persevere and you get moving. And then I'd say, more recently than that would just be really trying to apply the rhythmic flexibility and accuracy that's in jazz, bebop, post-bop, and fusion. The McLaughlin concept, or even somebody like Alan Holdsworth without the picking. But as far as picking, somebody like Al Di Meola or McLaughlin, I mean, it wasn't just about technique, it was about execution and rhythmic accuracy, that being important. And then also, as I, expanded into jazz and getting into tenor players and piano players, that's a whole different world, because I think, it's important. Obviously, it's important to study the innovators on your instrument, but in the world of rock, it's guitar, 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 and that's fine. But then when I started studying and playing jazz, I discovered it was incumbent upon me to get into the world of the tenor and the alto innovators and the piano innovators, right? And the list goes on and on. So that's another challenge that I think anybody listening that wants to get beyond the instrument to the music is important. So, and as far as like a practical level, I practice on like really heavy picks. It's kind of like putting the rings on the bat, where if you're playing baseball and you're swinging the bat and then you take those rings off, you play with a lighter pick. Maybe when I go to the gig, take a lighter pick, and it's kind of like gliding. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. My challenge, I think, is I think if I did that, I think what would happen is I would be murdering the strings. Like I would lose tone. My tone would suffer.
Sure. Well, I've done my fair share of that, of snap, crackle, and pop. I mean, it's that has a lot. Everybody's got to go through that too. Something that helped me a lot with that was recording myself. And going, oh man, what are you doing? You don't have to play that hard. No. Like you said, because the instrument will provide the tone. But another thing before I forget, I mean, there's just just being aware and studying the different right hand picking techniques. Strict alternate picking, cross picking, and then connected to cross picking is sweep picking. Oh, that's another guy that came up when I was in high school, is Frank Mbali, or in middle school. I'm like, man, what is this guy? What's going on here? I mean, it was, even John McLaughlin at the time said that this is a revolution. So, the sweep picking, like with Frank Mbali, and also, being able to play from the wrist and from the elbow. Pat Martino's really strong on the elbow. If you go to one of his clinics or read his books, he's, that's what he preaches. And, he's important enough that you got to listen to him, right? So, I mean.
Definitely. Now, probably my two favorite guitar players. Well, maybe I'd have to say three. Maybe my three favorite, which have been maybe the most influential, or some of the most influential guitar players, ever. George Benson.
Oh yeah.
Alan Holdsworth, And you also said the name of the other one, Frank Gambale. You know, those are some of my favorite guitar players. In the case of Alan Holdsworth, which you and I have had a lot of conversations about legato playing, and one thing about you is you're always practicing. Like, you're always practicing. So we talk a lot and have talked a lot over the years, and we talk about all kinds of everything. And it seems about 50% of the conversations I can hear you practicing as we're talking.
It's no disrespect.
No, and I don't take it to mean that. I mean, the amp is off, but I can hear, I can hear the guitar. And you've been talking a lot about working on your legato playing. So what has that consisted of? And I mean, you're telling me, you'll send me a text message and you say, the legato thing's coming together. Once the quarantine is over, I'm going to emerge as a new.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll take it, man.
So tell me about that journey.
Okay. That's good. Well, I mean, yeah, like, you're talking about shedding, you know all about practicing and dedication. You're a challenge to all of us when it comes to that. So, but, I mean, that's one thing this, COVID has, given us all practice time, right? At least the opportunity to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let me go at it from this way. Because as I said, Alan Holdsworth was really important. I mean, I remember hearing him in the late '80s, and it was like, what now? It's like, what's going to happen after this? So, and then I really immersed myself into straight ahead jazz for quite a while. And then, maybe in the last 10 or so more years have kind of revisited my fusion roots, so to speak. And because I just, some of that stuff I had no business even dealing with, in my opinion, earlier on. I mean, you got to always try. You jump in the pool, right? So I mean, going back to the Holdsworth and just the challenges, one really great thing now is that, like any real genius, like a Brecker or a Coltrane, I mean, it's come full circle now where we've got, a whole new generation that have codified a lot of these things. I mean, so, we've got the advantage of Tim Miller is one of my favorite players right now. Ben Monder is a great legato player. I mean, he's just a great musician and a great guitarist. Kurt Rosenwinkel is really important. I mean, I know for a fact, from first and second hand that he's a big Holdsworth devotee. Tom Quayle has really, man, his instructional and work is great, and his playing. And now the book I've really been working on since, earlier this, before this COVID thing, is an Australian guitarist, Chris Brooks. And I mean, I would recommend it for anybody because it even for somebody like me it cleared up some things just immediately and some very practical sequences and concepts and ideas and melodic passages that are just real applicable to changes. They're not just exercises. They're not just, pull-offs and hammer-ons. They're linear. and there's a lot of the, the concept contained in there. And then, same thing with Tim Miller and Tom Quayle. I haven't got it yet, but Tim Miller's got a new arpeggio book out that I'm going to, probably either get tomorrow or the next day, just to kind of keep throwing the gauntlet down for myself. And it's getting better. I mean, you know how it is. It's just, you see yourself making progress with something and breaking through. That's a great encouragement to keep at it, right? So
it is, but I have to say this though, because usually when players get to a certain place in their development, they become sort of crystallized, and it becomes very, very difficult for them to change fundamental things about technique,
sure,
approach, concept. It's very challenging for them to do that. And one thing about your playing is, every gig, every time we play, I hear the things that you're working on, and I also am able to detect that in large part they required some sort of major transformation. Something critical had to change about the way that you were approaching it for you to be able to play that way. But it doesn't seem to be a problem for you. That's not that isn't a common thing that I noticed with musicians. And I'm talking about even great musicians, people that are even musicians that are top musicians, maybe very influential top musicians. They usually get to a certain point, and as far as actually getting further than that, it's very challenging. There's only a few players that I can think of that were able to consistently push through that barrier. Coltrane is one of them, obviously. Miles did the same thing. He was always reinventing himself. There's only a few players that were like that, but then there are other players, like I said, that they kind of, once they develop their approach, the way that they're going to sort of present their material, that's really not going to change. So somebody like Sonny Stitt, once Sonny Stitt had sort of codified, his language, he spoke that language for the rest of his life, and he really didn't change that. And there's no shame in that, but
right, yeah, he didn't need to.
There's no shame in that. But what do you think about yourself causes you to be able to do that, to transition and to approach materials that's going to cause you to have to do things differently, and do them differently for a while, and be okay with it not happening the way that you want it to for a while?
Well, I think, fundamentally and at a concept, it's like the further you go into the wilderness or up the mountain, you realize, oh man, you reach a false summit, where it's like, oh, this isn't the top after all. There's another range ahead. But then you've still got the terrain that you've covered, and the perspective, and the right where you've gone before. So you're a more skilled explorer in that respect. But in the more pragmatic sense, you're right, because I've kind of been dismantling some things about my playing, working on this, legato concept, and kind of reforming things. And I've noticed that some things get neglected. It might not be as strong, so you got to double back on that. And then you realize that part of your playing is kind of affected by this transformation also. So you can't. There's no going back, right? So you just keep going. But I just, it's just the immensity of multiple idioms on the guitar. You know, I love, it's like, you know, man, I love Angus Young. I love, you know, whoever, fill in the blank, you know. But when I heard Eddie Van Halen, and when I heard Ritchie Blackmore, and when I heard, you know, I'm like, that's right there. Or Pat Metheny, you know, it's like, boom, you know. Yeah. I mean, there's millions of guys we're not mentioning, you know. We can talk about that later, but, you know, it's, you know, it's that realm, and you have to keep breaking it down. You know, it's like, you know, I didn't really get into classical guitar until, you know, really seriously until graduate school. And that's a whole universe in and of itself, you know. I mean, as far as, you can double back on this, but, you know, that's a lot of the bass line and things like that. That's important for when you brought that up earlier.
Yeah, and by the way, you're a great classical guitar player. I mean, it's like any kind of guitar playing I've ever heard you do is, I mean, it's up there. But let me ask you about this. There's a slight different angle on this, and maybe this will help this sort of, for us to kind of learn a little bit about what sort of is animating your drive to continue to improve as a musician. We've had lots of conversations about music, but we might have had even more conversations about spirituality, you know, about Christianity and,
sure.
You know, heavy stuff, theology and all kinds of stuff. How does that sort of animate, or, you know, how does that influence your approach to music?
Well, I just, you know, I think, you know, there has to be an excellence factor in you know, in worship and thinking. You know, I mean, you know, the scripture tells us to study, you know, to show ourselves approved unto God. You know, I mean, there's a lot of significant things. I mean, there's a, you know, Christian worship throughout history, you know, Judaism, you know, which is where Christianity is just another form of Judaism ultimately. But throughout, you know, Christian worship, you know, music is essential to that. I mean, you wouldn't have, you know, the historic musical heritage that we have without the church and without Christian history.
Right.
I think I'm trying to think of a John Stott quote from his book, The Cross. John Stott's an Anglican theologian. He passed about 10 years ago, but he was a pretty important Anglican theologian. The Cross of Christ is a great book. But he writes in that, just to paraphrase, that just, you know, that's one of the distinctives of the Christian faith and worship is the joy and the exaltation and the, you know, the magnification of God in worship and music. I mean, worship is much larger than music, obviously. You know, it's a much more holistic concept. But I guess, you know, it's a curiosity. You know, none of this stuff comes in a vacuum. You know, my folks grew up my dad was a World War II veteran, and, you know, he was the first of his family to get the opportunity to go to college because of the GI Bill following the war. And you know, my mother was an English teacher, but man, you know, there were 7 kids. I'm the 6th out of 7 children. And it was pounded into us that, you know, we better take advantage of the educational opportunities, you know, that were afforded to us. And so, when I was growing up and just starting school, I had older brothers and sisters that were in college and that were in grad school. So they weren't gonna let me get away with anything, never mind my folks. So it was a pretty vibrant, environment, very rich. So, I didn't even think about, that until it kind of came up. Does that make sense? That's
yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Now you
kind of pursuit thing, so it's like I would sneak into my different brothers and sisters' rooms, and each one of them were into different music. So it was kind of like a different world. It was like, okay, I got the Eagles and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel in this room, and then I got Yes and Pink Floyd and everything else in this next room. You know what I'm saying? So it was just, man, I didn't notice it. I didn't know it back then. I mean, but man, I'm thankful. I'm very grateful for that.
Now you grew up Catholic?
Yeah, I was raised Roman Catholic and went to Roman Catholic school up until 8th grade. I was the only one in my family that didn't go to a Roman Catholic high school. We can talk about that if you want to, but that's another story. So, but the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox tradition and some of the Protestant tradition is you don't get away from the university or learning or curiosity, right? Or the the glorification of God by knowledge and theology, the study of God, right?
Right.
It used to be the queen of sciences. So
yeah,
I hope that makes sense. I mean,
it makes total sense. And you're talking about worship and worship.
The worship isn't just making noise and you know what I'm saying, and just what I mean, and ecstatic things. I mean, that's part of it, but you worship God with your your mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, God created me as a musician. I mean, that's as a central part of my person, and so He's asking me to give that back to Him, right? And that's a part of my act of worship, is to refine what it is that I've been given and to present it in an excellent fashion, for his purpose, right? So right. There's that, and there's a sense of worship, of course, the kind of all-encompassing thing that says that just because it's not Sunday, that doesn't mean that you're off the hook, right? So worship is it's like a lifestyle. It's like everything that we're doing, the way that we interact with folks, everything else, it's all an act of worship. And the way that I approach music, and I know the way that you approach music, is never phoning it in, always taking it seriously, always being prepared for the gig, always being on time, doing the right things, to be ready for your opportunity to play. That's all part of worship. At Ohio State, when I'm talking to my students, of course, I can't really talk about worship,
right?
But I talk to them about professionalism and and there's that whole thing. I was interviewing Antonio Hart, and he said one of his things was always like, this could be my last gig. So like every gig, he was leaning in with this kind of ferocious intensity, because he was really treating it like this really could be the last time I get to play.
Right.
And there's a sort of, a sense of, there's a sense of being in the moment with that. And there's a you know, it's just like it's a really heavy thing. So often,
Sure.
because we're so busy, and we have so much stuff going on, it's easy to kind of look beyond the gig. Like, you know, I'm playing the gig, but I'm actually thinking about this, you know, I'm kind of
Right.
hungry, so I'm thinking about this, you know, double
Right.
cheeseburger.
I got my thing on with a full schedule and whatever. And it's just, and I just think it's difficult to kind of always, you know, it takes a lot of energy to bring that kind of fire and focus to each performance. But you can always tell you know, the the folks that have trained that, you know.
I always feel that way when I'm on a gig with you. You always come with that.
Oh man, oh thanks, but very kind words.
Well, I want you to know that I'm, you know, it's something that I noticed. Even the, I don't know, maybe dozens of, well, maybe hundreds of gigs. Well, maybe it's not hundreds. It's at least dozens of gigs that we've done just as a duo. And you know, you've called me in to play. We had a sort of a regularly occurring gig, like almost every year or every other year or something, for ACAD or something.
Yeah, I think that got virused out this year. That was fun. Yeah, because that you know, the duo dynamic is different. You know, it's a different thing.
Well, you know, I started playing bass now, and so I understand, you know, the sort of function and role of the bass player. Plus, now I have like a MIDI wind controller.
Yeah, man.
So I can take a break from from the horn. Now, you actually played saxophone.
Yeah. Yep, I did.
So talk about like early Tim Cummiskey, what started to turn you on, you know, musically, and maybe what instruments you played first, and maybe going to school band and all that kind of stuff.
Well, you know, at the time I was in grade school, you know, the instrumental music programs started in fourth grade, and the diocese, you know, the Central Ohio Diocese had, you know, music teachers that would go back and, you know, kind of transient music teachers. They'd be at the school 1 or 2 days a week, and then they'd go to other schools, right? Mm-hmm. And so you know, in fourth grade, you know, you got to, you know, if you were interested, you got to pick out your instrument. And as I said, my folks were, you know, my dad was a beautiful Irish tenor singer, and he loved music, and he was a soloist in the church, and you know, I grew up listening to that music, you know, the big band, World War II. I mean, so they encouraged me to check it out, and I picked alto saxophone, and you know, so that was fourth grade, and I kept at it. I went to Berkeley for a couple of years, and I tried to take lessons on guitar and saxophone, but I just knew there was no way that I would have been able to practice. You know, I think, you know, I did my audition with Bill Pierce, you know, and he was cool, but he was kind of like, yeah, really, you know, I mean, there's some serious saxophone going on at Berkeley, and some serious guitar. So I'd say my junior and senior year, I really kind of by default made my decision for guitar. But I mean, I played it from fourth grade on and loved it. I just, you know, for me, it was like it had to be one or the other after a certain point. You know?
Now, I don't know, this is famously or infamously, Alan Holdsworth, you know, said in an interview, one of these educational videos he did, that he didn't really like the guitar, that he wanted to play the saxophone. He loved John Coltrane. He wanted to play the saxophone, but saxophone was expensive, and his dad came home and said, "You're going to play guitar." So then he's playing the guitar.
Yeah, that's the way I heard it told in several sources. I mean, and he obviously, man, the mind and the heart and the concept were there. So
it's interesting because when you listen to Alan, after knowing that he wanted to play saxophone, his approach, the legato concept, it makes all the sense in the world, and the kinds of shapes and angles that he's going after, it makes all the sense in the world. Do you think
because there were cats around that time that were using the same technique, but their lines and their concept were nowhere near the the horn-like and the harmonic. Just the the openness. There's no other way to put it. I mean, what were we going to ask?
I was gonna say, do you think that playing saxophone, do you think that has sort of had an influence on your approach to playing guitar at all?
Just the awareness, maybe, because I was never a good enough saxophonist to get that heavy into it. So I'm not.
Well, but
I'm not
I know
just beating myself up. I'm just because I switched to tenor. I switched to tenor in high school, and I loved tenor. Now, my tenor wasn't. I had to get it repaired almost every month, but it just wasn't as good a horn. But it's like alto and tenor are almost like two different instruments. It's just like classical guitar and electric guitar are two different instruments. You know what I mean? It's like, the way that it can affect your mind. It's the sound.
Yeah, tenor seems to. I interviewed Kevin Turner, and Kevin actually started on saxophone also. So he played saxophone before guitar.
That's great.
And he was talking about how he listens to tenor players a lot because it seems to be almost like a direct transference, like the range, the instrument, it lines up really well.
Yeah, the tenor range, So,
and then that's an interesting thing. This is a little bit maybe nerdy saxophone stuff, but the whole phenomena where, okay, so most of the saxophone players are men, right? Most saxophone players are men. There are some women saxophone players, and there's some great players too that are women, but most saxophone players are men. And the common vocal range, the most prevalent or most common vocal range for a man is the tenor range, right?
I was just going to bring up the same thing. I mean, I'm not, I want to work on my singing more, but that's precisely my range, is B flat to G, pretty much,
Yeah, and it's interesting.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting because most saxophone players, once you become professionals, I'm talking about jazz and like pop saxophone, commercial players, most saxophone players are tenor players, right? There's fewer alto players. And in jazz, we really notice that there's a lot more tenor players than there are alto players, and it seems to be a natural sort of migration towards that range, that vocal range, because there's a lot of sort of identifying with the instrument, like a psychosomatic thing that happens where the different areas of the horn and where the sound is coming out of, you can start to sort of identify bodily with the instrument. So certain sounds on the saxophone that are more nasally, or sound like you're straining a little bit more, when they start straining, to the extent that it is somewhat similar to your vocal range, it seems like people have an easier time identifying with that. But anyhow, so that's a tangent.
No, you're right. It's like another intangible thing of music,
But it's interesting because the guitar, it fits in that kind of range. you know, and it's, you know, it's one of the instruments where, you know, anybody can play a little bit of guitar, right? It's kind of an accessible instrument, but it's, you know, maybe one of the more challenging things, you know, to do to become a great guitar player, you know, that exist. But, you know, so there's a wide range of, you know, skill levels. You know, there's people that can play a G chord and a D chord and a C chord, you know, and
Right.
they have the capo and they're running it up the neck for everything, right?
Sure.
And then there's folks like yourself that, you know, playing all over the neck. I don't think I've ever seen you use a capo.
I can. So
Yeah, well, right. It's always right. That's always a possibility.
I own one.
Right. I own one too, but it just stays on the
There you go.
stays in the box. All right. Well, okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean, you got. It's like you know, you're talking about the guitar. It's like, you know, I'm sure you've seen that beautiful little Chinese girl that's like 10 years old that sings and playing bossa nova. I mean,
Yep.
come on, man.
Yeah.
I think MIU, I think is her name. I mean, God bless her. She's great.
You know,
She's already a pretty phenomenal guitar player. You know, never mind her singing.
now, who was it that I was talking? I was talking to someone about starting really young. Okay, so, you know, Christian Howes, I interviewed him, and Chris, he has this kind of philosophy on teaching kids, like when they're really young, like you learn how to play because you're told to play. I mean, and he'll tell you that he didn't really enjoy playing. He didn't really want to play, but his parents said, this is what you're doing. And
Right.
so he just kept doing it. And he finally got to a place where he enjoyed doing it. And now, because he had been told and forced to be regimented with it, he had enough skill. He had a lot of skill, you know. So now I've seen situations where that works out, like with Chris. And I've seen situations where it really goes the other way. Like you start kids too young and they just like, they totally swear it off. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They almost have like a...
Right. I mean, that's the stereotype in the movies, right? You know, that you see, you know, you see an instance where somebody's forced to sit there and practice. And, you know, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a case by case basis, obviously. So...
Yeah, it's like.
But I mean, some of the most talented musicians I know, just, you know, here locally or even, you know, around the world, they you know, they came up in musical families, but,
Yeah.
you know, and not to contradict everything, but, you know, I think, you know, it's whatever. I don't have children. So, but I think, you know, I think it's wise to let them go to it and find it for themselves. You know, that was certainly, you know, my
in thinking about my own kid, you know, Moses, he's
Sure.
7 now.
Wow.
And, you know, he's got a guitar and, you know, a little pedal board and his own amp, and he's got some drums and he's got a P trumpet, you know. I bought him a pocket saxophone. He's got a recorder, right? And it's, you know, he's not doing anything with that stuff. He's a regular 7-year-old kid that wants to run around and do a bunch of pretty rough and tumble kind of stuff. That's, you know, he loves cars and his superheroes and, you know, big muscles. You know, he's all into that, you know, kind of hyper boy stuff. And it makes me recognize how strange I was, how weird I was to want to play when I started. You know, started when I was 6, and I like really wanted to do it. Right when you started playing saxophone, playing guitar, like how like possessed by it were you? Were you like driven? Like you were like, man, I can't wait to get to the instrument every day, or did it take a while for you to develop?
No,
that?
it took a while. I didn't really get into it until kind of high school. I mean, it was one of the things I did. I mean, again, my parents really encouraged me, and drove me all over town for lessons, and I, found great teachers, and so that was part of it too. Was just the accountability. I loved all my teachers and respected them, so I didn't want to show up. I mean, it didn't seem to be as my math homework. It didn't bother me if I might have disappointed my math teacher, but I didn't want to disappoint my music teachers. And plus, I had kind of an intuitive sense that this was an extracurricular thing. It's like, my parents are, my dad's driving me all over town to take me to lessons after he already worked. Stuff like that. That stuff doesn't register until later in life, So, but yeah, I mean, high school, it's like, yeah, I mean, especially with the guitar, once you start hearing some of that music, it's like, man, and the whole sound thing and the sound exploration, like when I got my first amp, but then I didn't really have a good distortion pedal. So that was like, I remember that. I'm like, wait a minute, there's something missing in this equation, it's, so, but
yeah, I know you're still searching in that way too. We're constantly talking about gear.
But I mean, yeah, gear. But I mean, practicing too. I mean, I've been practicing more the last 6 months than any other, time in my life. So, I'm sure part of it is that the return on effort is probably, the threshold is going up and down, but so anyways, and high school was high school, there was other stuff to do then, so, but anyways.
All right, so so do you have any hobbies?
I like to read. I try to exercise every day. I know that sounds pretty boring. So
that's all right.
I tell you what, I'm glad I have a treadmill and a rowing machine and a bike and some weights, and I'm glad I had all those with this COVID thing, man, because it would have been a different scene,
Yeah, that what was it, 2 or 3 months that everything was shut down in Ohio. Crazy. You know that they're finally opening Michigan gyms back up.
Yeah, well,
it's some crazy stuff. I think I would have been totally out of my mind if I couldn't go to the gym. Yeah, I mean, because the gyms here opened back up the day after Memorial Day.
Yeah. Well, there was a class action lawsuit, so,
Yeah,
God bless America. God bless America, local government. I mean, that's the good and the bad part about our republic. It's not a uniform totalitarian thing. It's gotta be worked out, cities and states. So, but anyways. So, what other hobbies? Gee, I don't know. No.
Well, I guess gear is its own hobby, right?
Sure it is. Yeah, sure. I've got like 2 rigs now. I mean, I've got my traditional pedal board, but I got that Kemper back in January, and that thing's crazy. So
yeah. Have you profiled any amps yet?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've built a few things that I really like. And there were some good starters. I'm by no means have I learned this thing yet, but it's the way to go. I was skeptical for a while, but it's the way to go. Nice and quiet.
Yeah, it's
There's no hissing when when you've got it, when you've got that 5150 stack raging. You stop the strings and it's nice and quiet. There's no noise. So
yeah, I'm a Line 6 Helix guy.
Yeah,
and,
man.
I'm actually using that right now. I'm using it as a monitor. I use it for all kinds of stuff. It's the main interface in my studio also, because you can go 8 ins and 8 outs, although I don't usually have a need to do more than one at a time. But it's very
I've got
cool.
the effects. The effects are incredible. Just the little 8x10, it's insane.
All right, so I did want to give you I did want to ask you about the future. So the future is kind of nebulous still, I know, for musicians, because although I think some things have started to open back up and things seem like it's kind of moving in a particular direction. I mean, we're talking about a vaccine now for the coronavirus, and they're also discovering that it's not the sort of death sentence as it was presented to be. And kind of there's a lot of fear coming from the media and stuff, and some of that is like. Sometimes you do have to overbake the potato because people won't really pay attention unless you really go at it.
It's just it's part of the monster of the 24/7 news media that we've created. Peace sells, but who's buying? Right?
Yeah.
They need to start the GNN, the Good News Network. I'd like to see how that, how that one would fare. Because you could do it. You could find 24 hours. Anyways, that's another trail. So,
honestly, there's a lot more good stuff to be reporting about than all this gloom and doom that we see. And one thing I really don't like about American society, the media in particular, is we don't want to celebrate people that kind of did things the right way.
Sure.
They never had to go to jail. They never, sold drugs to, be the seed money for their rap career or something. They never did any of that stuff, and they didn't make excuses. They just worked hard.
Right. Imagine that.
They're not popping out a bunch of kids out of wedlock. They stay married, all of those kinds of things that, marriage is hard, man. Marriage is very hard. It's super hard. And, I'm no saint with respect to that. I'm in my second marriage. But it's just, there's not enough kind of holding up these standards and saying, hey, these are the people, these are the kind of decisions that we need to be modeling. Is a lot, what there seems to be a lot of, though, is if you made a lot of mistakes, then there seems to be a desire or an appetite to see that person sort of rebuild themselves. And I guess that's not horrible, but
no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with redemption and forgiveness and all that, but it's a Russian roulette. You don't know, right? I mean, what are the statistics? 5 people are you gonna end up back even? Or are you gonna end up, you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I do.
It's not. You're opening up a Pandora's box. I mean, I can speak to that, but from my own personal, piety or lack thereof. That's Romans 8, flesh and the spirit, they war against each other. So I hear you. I think it's a problem. And then as things generationally get passed down, it just gets worse. So we lower the test scores for schools, or we start something the generation ago that was a scandal or had a stigma is now accepted, and then the next generation it gets worse. They don't talk about the consequences. I mean, I think I think food programs are great, but since when are schools supposed to be providing social services? And meal plans. They're supposed to be educating students, teaching them how to critically think, within a very clear and defined and profound, Western classic tradition, whether it's public schools or not. Okay. So, but that's another story too. So it all fits together. It's not, you can't take one, it's like Chesterton said, if you're going to remove a fence, you better know and find out why it was
why
there.
The fence was there for in the beginning.
In the first place.
That's right.
So
that's right.
G.K. Chesterton, folks, go check him out. That was a heavy cat.
Well, we're talking about sort of dumbing stuff down, and there's this kind of lowest common denominator. And the whole sex sells thing, that's been a pretty constant thing for a long time. That's been the case since before the Beatles, right? Since before everything. It's always been there. But what seems to have happened as of late is sort of the restraints have been sort of thrown off. I think that maybe the number one song in the country right now is called WAP. And WAP is by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. And the song WAP, Wet A-P. Just imagine what A and P stand for, okay? That literally is the number one song in the country right now. So it's a pretty amazing change from in the 60s with, Motown, and now WAP is the number one song in the country.
Leaves nothing to the imagination. I mean,
it's so crude and absurd. There's I think this must have been Candace Owens had an interview with Ben Shapiro on his Sunday Conversations kind of interview thing that he has. And he's had some really great folks on there. He had Robert Barron on there, Bishop Robert Barron.
Oh, great.
He had Ravi Zacharias.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
That's a heavy cat.
Yeah, he had a bunch of, and I don't agree with everything that Ben says, but he had Candace Owens on, and Candace was sort of criticizing. It wasn't really a criticism of Cardi B. It was a criticism of the Democratic candidate for president right now. It was a criticism of him for not taking an interview with anyone else, but going on an interview with Cardi B, right? And so I'm sure he had some political advisor that he's paying a ridiculous amount of money tell him that's what he should do. So I mean, Now, so what ends up happening is, so Candace is criticizing that, and then Cardi B takes issue with that, and then you can see this back and forth that they have on Twitter. And it's totally ridiculous because Cardi B has no clue. She doesn't even know the first thing about politics. She sounds like a total moron in the interview, right? And Candace is telling her, look, you're using your platform to make people dumber, and you're saying stuff that's not true. And like this, she's just basically calling her out. And then there's some back and forth. You could check it out.
I didn't see that. I'll have to check it out. I mean, yeah, I'm very aware of Candace Owens and, Ben Shapiro also. I mean, he had Dr. John MacArthur on there. It was really good. So,
yeah.
But
anyhow, I don't mean this to be particularly political, but my point is that this stuff is intersecting with our society in the highest ways. I mean, because remember, Cardi B, #1 song, WAP, she's actually interviewing a presidential candidate, like
sure.
on her show. Like, how is that? I don't even know how that is possible. Like, I don't even know how that's possible. And that's not to say that people shouldn't be able to interview anybody they want to, or have a show, or have the freedom to have a podcast or something. It has nothing to do with that, but it just seems to be an indication of where we're going, where we are, and of where we're going. And it just seems like a lot of really dumb stuff. I saw the movie Idiocracy recently.
Oh, okay.
Again, I saw it again. It's a movie that I regularly cite, and I tell people you should watch this movie because there's so much truth in this movie. I think it was 2003 or something like that. That movie came out, and it's Luke Wilson and Maya Rudolph are in that movie, and there's just a lot of truth in that movie. I mean, the president of the country is a former porn star, and it's just like that. It's just like that. I mean, it's Terry Crews. The president's Terry Crews.
Right.
It is just like, and they're just, it's just satire, and they're telling a lot of jokes. But if you look at what stuff is like right now, it's kind of like what they were saying in the movie. It's a lot of really ignorant kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there's so many, there's so many aspects to just the, the political game, at every level in this country that, you wonder why somebody of virtue and integrity and intelligence would want to get involved.
Yeah.
But those people have to, otherwise there won't be much of a future. I mean, here's a film for you if you haven't seen it. It's on Amazon Prime. The Fight for Our Lives, and it's kind of about the philosophical destruction of the West. It starts out with the historian and economist Niall Ferguson. I don't know if you know who he is. I think he's a Harvard and Yale guy, and he's another one of the. He got a lot of currency on PBS with a lot of really good films that came out of his writing. But he starts out by talking talking about the misconception that a lot of people think that civilizations that civilizations always gradually dissolve. He said no, that usually happens pretty fast. The downfall can happen pretty fast. So, but
that's what happened to the Roman Empire, right? It was a pretty fast.
Yeah. I think who was the guy? The Rise and Fall of Great Powers. That's a book that came out in the late '80s by Paul Kennedy, who was a very prominent historian at the time, and that was his presupposition talking about American power, is that, you know, at that time we were getting overextended, and, you know, he aligned that with the, you know, Gibbons, you know, who's the great, you know, rise and fall of the Roman Empire. You know, I think it was Edward Gibbons that wrote that book. But anyways, but, you know, history really isn't important anymore, and, you know, that's just old stuff, right? You know.
Yeah, it's actually we're really sad.
A lot of virtue signaling for a lot of dead people that a lot of people don't know anything about, but they're really smart while they're doing it. That's another story. Don't get me started.
It's really sad that there is not very much attention paid to history. I mean, the average person, it seems like they know a lot about what's happened over the last maybe 20, 30 days, maybe not even that anymore, right? But not very educated about what's happened over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yep.
And even basic stuff like definitions of terms is just not it's not something that you can assume.
Well, they have to fabricate. They have to fabricate an entirely spurious vocabulary. You know, I mean, we could give a bunch of examples, but, you know.
Yeah, I'll tell you with the you know, it seems like maybe not that long ago you could have a debate or you could have a discussion with someone, and you didn't have to spend very much time defining terms, or, you know, you'll say a word, but then you'll actually provide the definition in your conversation, you know, because you don't know if people actually know what that word means, or they may think they know what it means, but they don't like really understand what it means. And so them understanding that term is like a critical component in them understanding your argument or your position. So you have to like lay out all of this foundational stuff that's kind of like, but that foundational stuff, you should already know that stuff. That just seems to be basic information that you should be able to assume that people just understand. It's like going to certain places and expecting that, you know, they're going to be able to understand basic English. You know, if I go to the corner store and I try to converse with someone, I mean, it seems like an assumption that you should be able to make in having conversations with people, especially on political topics where people don't even understand, like, they don't know how many senators there are. You know, they don't understand how the Electoral College works.
Right. They want to abolish that.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, it's just basic stuff. And then these are the folks that are...
We're teaching classes on self-esteem and values clarification and things like that. You know, just mush. It really is. I mean, it's... So... Yeah.
Well, everybody gets a trophy, so we're good.
And back to history, something I think is, quote I like to remember is C.S. Lewis always says you should read, 5 to 10, quote unquote old books for each new one that you read. I think that's a good dictum.
Yeah, I wonder how many people actually take that suggestion. Not many, unfortunately. Well, Tim, it's been great talking with you. We could just keep going and going because there's 1,000 topics. There's 1,000 topics to discuss, and with all the current events that are going on, and then just with everything. But thanks for your time. Thanks for doing this. It took us a while to get this hooked up, but I'm glad that we that we were able to get it hooked up.
Yeah, man, it's an honor. God bless you. Thank you for doing this. So,
absolutely, man. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, man.
All right.